Welcome to the first podcast of our summer 2025 Breaking the Ice podcast series. I'm Jessica Shadian, President and CEO of Arctic 360, Canada's national Arctic think tank, and one of this summer's co-hosts. Well, while summer may be in full swing, there is no vacation when it comes to matters of global and Arctic geopolitics. Canada has a new Prime Minister and a new mandate. Among its priorities is a renewed focus on strengthening economic and security relations with allied partners. Also, of course, is focused on securing Canada's Arctic sovereignty at home and to meet its responsibilities to safeguarding regional Arctic security and defense. This past month, NATO members met in Brussels. The annual summit took place as NATO's own attention to the Arctic accelerates. The EU and Canada have signed a security and defense partnership. Canada and the UK have agreed to enhance their own defense and security partnership, which includes defense innovation and multi-use technologies. Germany's Navy, for the first time, is heading to the Arctic for Operation Atlantic Bear to help patrol the region, with stops planned for Iceland, Greenland, and Canada. So, to help us unpack this busy summer, we could not be more fortunate and grateful to have with us today our very esteemed guests. We have EU Ambassador to Canada, Geneviève Tuts, German Ambassador to Canada, Matthias Lüttenberg, and UK High Commissioner to Canada, Rob Tinline. So thank you three for taking the time to talk with us today. We'll talk about NATO, Europe, and the collaboration with Canada on Arctic defense and security. So with so much on the table, I say let's get started.
Yes, thank you, Jessica, and hello also from my side. My name is Sofie, I'm from Germany, and I'm currently doing my dual degree at the Hertie School in Berlin, but also at the Monk School in Toronto. So in September, I will move to Toronto and learn from the Canadian side how international relations is going to practice.
Thanks, Sofie. I'm Alexandra. I'm a master's student at the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po, getting my degree in international security. I'm Canadian originally, but I've lived in both the UK and France. So I have quite an interest in transatlantic security. I'm very, very grateful for all of your time today and really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so morning, everyone. I'm Rob Tinline. I've been High Commissioner in Canada since February, but I have 25 plus years in the British Foreign Service, much of it working on a range of security issues.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning also from my side. I'm Matthias Lüttenberg, the German ambassador here in Ottawa since September last year. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation on the Arctic because I just returned from a trip to the 3 Northern Territories last month. Thank you for having me.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jessica. And thank you very much for this very timely podcast on Arctic. So my name is Geneviève Tuts. I'm the EU ambassador here in Canada since September 2024. So enjoying a nice summer in Canada with my colleague Matthias and Robert.
So just to start off with something a little bit more general, but touching on that first NATO topic, in June, NATO held a summit in The Hague. It was the first for Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And one of the first major outcomes of it was a commitment to invest 5% of GDP annually in defense. 1.5% of that can go towards protecting critical infrastructure, civilian preparedness and resilience, and innovation, among some other items. The Hague Declaration also reaffirmed the commitment to harnessing emerging technology and innovation to advance collective security. On top of all of that, we know that NATO is taking a closer look at the northern flank and expanding its Arctic focus beyond the European high north. Did the Arctic factor into any of the NATO summit discussions? And if so, in what capacity? Are there any takeaways in terms of NATO Arctic activities from the summit in June? Ambassador Lüttenberg and High Commissioner Tinline, maybe let's start with you.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe I should start by stating that Germany is not an Arctic country, but we have an observer status in the Arctic Council. Therefore, we do have an interest in the region for sure. We are very much involved also in Arctic security policy, also within NATO, given the levels of our engagement. We're extending partnerships with allies in the region, intensifying deployments, and exercise activity and investing in military procurement to develop capabilities that contribute to our posture in the high north. Allies as such are part, of course, of the summit and the summit declaration. But let me say that it's also very timely an important contribution to raise awareness within NATO of the Northern Theater, as well as regards our military preparations for that. It's also crucial that allies are aware in Europe, but also in Canada, that there's a serious threat stemming from an ever more aggressive Russia. Russia has not only started an unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine in 2022, but it has for a long time enlarged its military footprint in the Arctic region by modernizing its bases, deploying advanced weaponry, and expanding its naval and air capabilities in the Arctic region. So therefore, it was very important also to address the issue of the Arctic in the summit. But the main focus of the summit was certainly the defense spending part. And you mentioned already the 5%, 3.5 plus 1.5, which was very much in the focus of this year's NATO summit.
Yeah, so look, I would echo all of that. The UK, like Germany, isn't an Arctic nation, but we're very close. We do a lot of Arctic science and work very closely on a whole range of issues around the Arctic, but with security at its heart. I mean, the summit in The Hague, as Matthias says, is very much about how we can step up the capabilities of NATO. So that was a broader conversation than focused on a single area or issue, but trying to make sure that we are building the alliance for the long term. And that's why you saw the 3.5, the 5% commitments stretching out over the next decade. But clearly the Arctic is an important part of all of that.
Thank you both. Just to follow up on that idea of collaboration, Ambassador Tuts, we know that the EU is not a NATO member, but the EU and NATO have worked together in the past, and they've signed a number of joint declarations to strengthen cooperation. In this context, is there anything you'd like to add about NATO and the EU's overlapping interests and activities in the Arctic or cooperation together?
Yeah, thank you very much for recalling that the EU is, of course, not a member of NATO, but 23 EU member states are members of NATO, and the 3 Arctic countries in the EU also now NATO's member with the accession of Sweden and Finland. So this is not new, of course. The EU and NATO are cooperating a lot on strategic questions because we are a strategic partnership and our members of both organizations are facing the same threats and the same challenges. So I think that the last EU-NATO declaration underlined the importance to take into consideration the impact of climate change on security. And that's the reason why we have now a sort of structured dialogue on security and climate change and defense. These security concerns in the Arctic are not new, of course, with climate change and with the melting of the ice. And it has been several years that we are looking very closely and monitoring what's happening in the Arctic, and especially the interest of China in the region. So this is a question of global security, and I'm happy to say that the EU and NATO are cooperating, even if, as I mentioned, we are not part of all discussion, but we have some different kind of structured dialogue on these questions.
Maybe looking about the situation between the European Union and Canada from a different eye, because just ahead of the NATO summit, the EU and Canada formalized a new partnership to enhance security and defense cooperation. So as this is very new, maybe you could provide a quick overview about the partnership and especially also point out any aspects that touch on the Arctic or could include the Arctic in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I had the chance to be in Brussels on the 23rd of June at the EU-Canada Summit. Actually, this was the 20th EU-Canada Summit, but one of the key achievement of this summit is, as you mentioned, the signature of the Security and Defense Partnership between the EU and Canada. This is a very significant step in our cooperation on security and defense issue. This is not new, of course. Our cooperation with Canada on this matter dates from 2015, because I think Canada was the first third country with which the EU organized a formal dialogue on security and defense. But this strategic security and defense partnership is new because now we have a more comprehensive approach, and the EU and Canada have decided to cooperate even more on some important topic today, like cyber security, maritime security, or space security, of defense industry, etc. So, of course, the Arctic is part of this question. There is a link between the Arctic and all these areas of cooperation. Just to give you the example of maritime security, this is an important topic on which, of course, we will have to discuss how, for example, to organize the mobility of troops in the Arctic. But maybe most important is in the joint statement agreed by the leaders in Brussels, there is a paragraph, a full paragraph on the Arctic. This is quite new. You know that in 2023, during the summit in Xinjiang, there was a very small sentence recalling the importance of peace, sustainability, and stability of the Arctic. Now we have, and I will read it, the Arctic will remain an area of close collaboration to foster peace, security, stability, and sustainable economic development, in particular of the blue economy, in full respect of the interests, priorities, and rights of indigenous people, and in line with the United Nations Declaration on the right of indigenous people. So I think this is quite remarkable that now the Arctic, in all its dimension, in a very comprehensive way, is prominently in the joint statement adopted by the leaders. So we have both the security and defense partnership, but we have also a dedicated attention to the Arctic during this summit. This is an important signal for both the EU and Canada.
Okay, and now taking a step back to this, what would you say is the EU's longer-term vision for the engagement in the Arctic when it comes to defense and security? And also, do you see that the partnership is becoming a means to build a structured and long-term security and defense collaboration between Canada and the EU in the Arctic?
Well, as you know, the EU has adopted its strategy on the Arctic in October 2021. So the objective is very clear, a comprehensive approach dealing with sustainability, with economy, inclusiveness, protecting youth, education, but also security linked to climate change. So I think this was already the case in 2021. And now I have to say that after the new commitments by our leaders, Canada and the EU will even cooperate more. And we have seen also sign of openness from Canada to cooperate more with the EU in the Canada strategy or policy adopted in December last year. So I think there is a wide range of possibility to cooperate, being on the technological side or on connectivity, of course, but security is probably one of the main issues on which we are going to work together.
So maybe you could further collaborate or explain a bit what the next step will be. So what can we see in the next 1 or 2 years happening in this regard?
Well, what the next steps will be, what can I tell you? That there was a clear political commitment in June, so 4 weeks ago. And now, of course, it will be up to the EU and its member states to enhance and to develop this new cooperation. As I mentioned, we have different possible areas of cooperation, not just on security, but I mentioned connectivity. You know that the question of subsea cables it's a very important one to connect, and with this cable to connect Europe, maybe with Japan, and to use this possibility in the Arctic. Climate change is an important issue as well, where we need to cooperate more. But as I mentioned, the economic part is also very important. We want, as I mentioned, a comprehensive approach, economical approach with respect for indigenous people, indigenous community, and also enhancing youth program and education program. The EU is financing education program in Greenland, for example. So I think that the areas of cooperation are multiple, and we will dedicate the next months and years working on it.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. To shift gears a little bit, High Commissioner Tinline, in May, the UK published a defense research brief, and that was followed up by its strategic defense review in June. Both reports highlighted the Arctic, especially the European High North, as areas of growing importance. And as a result, the UK is looking to strengthen its ties with Arctic allies like Canada, but also Norway. We've seen movement on a new defense treaty with them to reinforce NATO's northern flank. And the reports also place an increasing emphasis on the UK's cold weather competencies and naval innovation, things like a hybrid navy and autonomous shipping. With all of this in mind, where do you see the UK's long-term role in the Arctic? Are there 2 or 3 specific sort of competencies or interests for Arctic defense engagement that you see as being particularly important for the UK?
Thank you. Yes, so our strategic defence review, which came out a little over a month ago, as you say, sort of set a new framework for what we were trying to achieve through defence. And it's worth just sort of stepping back a little bit. Obviously, the NATO 5% commitment is sets the frame for this is a significant step up in investment in defence. It's the biggest investment we've made since the end of the Cold War. This is a moment where we feel that we need to step up our capabilities. And what you see in the Strategic Defence Review is a real intent to do that, and across the board, but with some really important focuses, such as try to learn what we've from our support from Ukraine, the innovation that we've shown and the Ukrainians have shown in terms of how the technology we're using is changing. How do we embed that innovation into defence as we go forward? How do we make sure that we've got the industrial capabilities to support defence, which was a key part of what we've all seen through the conflict in Ukraine following Russia's illegal invasion. But as you say, what it also says is that this is NATO first. It's not NATO only. We'll continue to be present outside the NATO area, and you see that with our carrier strike group currently in Australia and the Pacific. But it is NATO first, and that is a focus on the NATO area. Now, you ask particularly where we would focus. I would say there are a couple of things within it that I would draw out. Firstly, the naval presence, the area between Greenland, Iceland, the UK, as you come into the North Atlantic, has always been an area of considerable focus for the UK. So I think you'll see a continued focus on that sort of naval security. That goes into a whole range of issues, but it also includes what Geneviève was talking about undersea cables and other sort of sets of issues in terms of how we make sure we're securing ourselves against threats, obviously most particularly from Russia. The other element that I think is worth drawing out is the Joint Expeditionary Force, the JEF, where we work very closely with a group of Northern European countries to try to increase our capabilities and our interoperability in the north. And you've seen a lot of that over recent months with visits by our Defence Secretary, but also joint work across those countries. And so I think those are the 2 things that I would draw out in particular. The other one I would come back to, which is slightly outside the defence area, is the scientific cooperation, that we've always had a very strong scientific effort in the Antarctic and the Arctic. And that's one of those areas where we work very closely with Canada on, and we've had some excellent collaboration in the recent past.
Thank you. Just to draw up, this theme of science and defense and sort of where these might overlap, the new Canadian government is putting a lot of emphasis on innovation. We know that that's something on the agenda for NATO countries, for the UK as well.
Yeah.
And it's also interested in building out Arctic infrastructure. And that's infrastructure is obviously also a key key point for the UK in the Arctic as well. When it comes to innovation, but also things like dual-use technology, or even with British space technology, do you see this being a potential new area of collaboration for the UK and Canada in terms of developing this kind of dual-use technology?
Yeah, so look, there's a incredible depth of cooperation, collaboration between the UK and Canada already. I'm very conscious as High Commissioner. The government is part of that, but it's not all of it, and it's probably not most of it. All the cooperation that goes on between our universities, between our companies, there is a vast amount of work that happens with real cutting-edge innovation and research. That some of it comes through the government, but not all of it. So I think it's important we don't lose sight of that sort of wider effort that's not simply the government-to-government effort. But as you saw from the Prime Minister's statement when our Prime Minister visited in May, absolutely innovation and sort of security were both themes running through that joint statement. And how do we collectively make sure that we are driving that innovation, making sure it benefits our economies and our peoples, but also making sure that it enhances our security. And there's a big role for governments in making that happen. That's what you saw the Prime Minister's commit to. It's not just UK and Canada alone. It's UK and Canada with a whole range of other partners, including obviously those on the call. And we will continue to work in different formats depending on the situation. But I think the UK and Canada together have some real strengths when it comes to their sort of defence innovation ecosystems, and really trying to make sure that we're working together across those as much as we possibly can, absolutely at the heart of the Prime Minister's joint statement.
Moving now from the UK to Germany, because Germany published its latest Arctic policy in 2024, and this is built around three core pillars: the security, but also the economic development and the environmental protection. As we already mentioned in our introduction, Germany also just recently announced last month that it will be sending a naval support ship to the Arctic operation Atlantic Bear. Germany is also going to participate for the first time in Canada's Operation Nanook. So perhaps Ambassador Lüttenberg, can you give us a bit of a broader backdrop to how Germany got to where it is now in terms of the Arctic defense engagements?
Thank you. I'm very happy to do that. Germany's Arctic policy is based on guiding principles which stem from our national security strategy as well. It's about robustness, it's about resilience, and it's about sustainability. And the German government is therefore committed to fostering the security and stability in the Arctic region as the foundation for the protection and sustainable development of it. Indeed, the importance of the Arctic to security policy has increased in our view, and I refer to the threat coming from Russia already. And our government is thus playing its part in protecting the entire NATO allied territory. It supports its EU and NATO partners in the region in defending the shared security interests. We are extending our military cooperation with Arctic allies, especially here Canada, but also Norway, Denmark, including in joint military procurement, increased regional deployments and exercises like the Bear that you just mentioned, and rising investments and capabilities that are relevant to the High North, but like the maritime surveillance aircraft. But at the same time, the rules-based order as such needs to be preserved also in the Arctic. It is under challenge for sure. China increases its presence in the Arctic and accelerates its development of both Arctic research and military capabilities. Just recently, we saw a Chinese research vessel returning to the Arctic waters of Alaska for the second year in a row. And Germany is aware of the security concerns of its Arctic NATO allies and works closely together with them and supports their security interests. That's why our new Arctic guidelines, to which we already referred, emphasize security aspects more than ever before. With the deployment of the vessel Berlin, alongside many other elements of our cooperation, we signal to our allies that Germany is ready and willing to take responsibility for the security of our alliance. I'm very happy to say that there will also be Canadian sailors on board of the Berlin next month to increase our interoperability in the alliance. And I will hopefully be able to welcome the ship soon in Canada.
So do you think this is just the beginning of a long-term engagement in the Arctic region, or are there also any other areas where Germany has particular expertise and interests when it comes to defense in the Arctic? Such, I'm thinking about innovation, military assets, or also dual-use technologies.
I think indeed it's only part of the puzzle, and Germany is very engaged in Arctic research. I would even venture to say that scientific research is our main contribution to the Arctic, especially in the past. Now we're shifting a little bit more to security, but it doesn't mean that we will stop continuing our Arctic research. The Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research, for example, is one of the leading international research institutes in polar and marine research. And you surely have heard about the Polarstern and its epic journey through the ice in the Mosaic expedition. It's important to us to maintain and expand free and responsible Arctic research. It is my understanding that fundamental research, scientific research, is done first of all in order to understand the origins and underlying mechanisms and linkages of natural phenomena. And that is what our outstanding specialists do. Its results can, however, be used in various ways. You would have to ask one of our researchers on permafrost, for example, or ice quality, how they see their results being used and what the potential dual use or military impact could be on this knowledge. But Germany is willing to expand its Arctic research cooperation with like-minded partners, such as Canada, for sure. And this year, thank you, Geneviève, the EU Commission published 2 independent expert reports on dual-use research and innovation as well. And this is very important for us, but I could go on and give you more examples on what the Arctic research in Germany is doing, but just a brief look maybe also to Inuvik in the north, where we have our satellite station. And certainly satellite imagery is serving many purposes at the same time, just as one more example.
Yes, perfect. You're mentioning the permafrost, and this is perfectly transition to our next question, which is my last question for you, but we would also like to open up the following question for everyone else after that. Because we would like to talk about how Germany is setting out to navigate the balance between climate change and defense, because they are probably not exclusive mutually exclusive. And for example, could dual-use technologies address climate change, but also defense needs in the Arctic? Maybe you could elaborate a bit further on this.
Sure. First of all, it's a very pragmatic correlation between the two, because ever since Russia started the war against Ukraine, we had to send our permafrost experts from Russia to Canada, because Russia was certainly not the place where we would like to do our research anymore. So the German-Canadian cooperation on permafrost research benefited a lot in the last couple of years. And we are grateful that Canada is also opening up for our researchers to work here. The Alfred Wegener Institute, for example, is just currently analyzing the oldest continuous ice core that has ever been drilled on Earth. Okay, this comes from the Antarctic, but just to highlight what we are doing there, it's a milestone in climate research because it's the core includes bubbles, which are probably containing greenhouse gases from the last 1.2 million years. Hard to imagine that, but this is certainly something which will help us enormously understand also what's going on in the north, and we are very happy to expand our research footprint in observation technology with partners like Canada. The goal is here to establish a high-precision continuous polar borehole temperature monitoring system. That's going to be a little bit too much into detail, but this is what we're currently doing with our Canadian partners. And you see from this that certainly to understand how, for example, the climate change is affecting the region, how about the safe passages in the Northwest Passage? What does it mean, climate change in terms of melting ice for our transportation pathways, but also for our security setup and the posture that we'll have to take, because others will also certainly look into this and they might want to benefit militarily from that. And this is where I think with the research and the military get together. You also mentioned the economic side of it, and for sure, I would lie if I told you that German business is not following closely the opening up of transportation pathways in the north, because it might be an additional option to what we already see. Just to mention the port of Churchill in Manitoba, Hudson Bay, which might become a hub also for energy exports or more in the future, once we do have a safe way to use the passage around the year, or at least for some parts of it.
Thank you so much. So, Ambassador Tuts and High Commissioner Tinline, do you have any thoughts you would like to add to this discussion?
Robert, if you allow me. But I just wanted to share with you, to give you very concrete examples about the way the EU-sponsored innovations could have an impact on security in the Arctic, on climate change in the Arctic. Two concrete examples. The first one, of course, is what we do with Horizon Europe, previously Horizon 2020. This is a research program with which we have developed many projects in the Arctic. So I'm just now referring to the figures I have. I think that in terms of funding, we have spent 275 million euro, and we have 100 projects in the first program, Horizon 2020. And now we have already contributed to 115 million euro and 39 projects at midterm of Horizon Europe. So that's a lot, and that shows that the EU is one of the most important players in Arctic research. The second topic and the second concrete project I wanted to mention is Copernicus. Copernicus is a satellite program which monitors the Earth from the space, and it's very useful to document and analyze climate change because you are able to record, to track, to predict the sea level, the sea ice concentration, the thickness and temperature, iceberg density, and ocean temperature. So this is very useful, of course, but it could also be used for other purposes. We could imagine that a satellite can track other things like new shipping routes or monitoring maritime activities, which could have, of course, an impact on security in the Arctic. So climate and security are, of course, interlinked, but with these two examples, research and Copernicus satellite, you see where we could see this intersection of the two topics. Thank you.
So look, I think my colleagues have said plenty. Look, I think there are a couple of things I'd draw out. One is a lot of this cooperation has been happening for some time. So this isn't for most of us a new subject we're coming to, but this is clearly a moment where we step it up. We've long had periodic naval presence in the Arctic. We've long worked very closely on training in cold weather in Canada and the north of Europe. But this is a moment where we are sort of stepping up across the board. And one of the things we have a UK military base out west called Batters, the British Army Training Unit Suffield, which is co-located with the Canadian Forces Base Suffield, where we do an awful lot of work together on training and innovation. You see that brought out of the Prime Minister's statement about how we can do more there to try and use the assets that we've got, but refocus them on sort of driving innovation. Clearly, that's not in the Arctic, but it's a place where we do a lot of that sort of cooperation, where we can foster innovation and find ways to meet the challenges of today.
That's it's interesting to hear about the science and the research. I'm curious now about sort of this idea of the Arctic being the arena for climate change, because I think when so many people think about the Arctic, the first thing that they think of is climate change and melting ice. And so I'm curious that when there's these discussions about defense spending in the Arctic and seeing it as a defense arena and not just a climate change arena, what's the reception been like at home, sort of in the UK and Germany more broadly in the European Union, especially since the UK, Germany, and the majority of EU members are not themselves Arctic states? Is there pushback? Do you see this being framed primarily through Russia, through NATO collaboration? What's sort of the reception and the framing like for you when you see these conversations domestically? Please.
Yeah, so just to pick up on something Matthias said earlier, we were in the north together earlier in the year, and what it was exactly some of the conversations we're having with some of the communities about how much is this about economic development, how much is this about dealing with climate change, how much is the interest just about security, and actually it's all of those things. Depending on who you talk to in the UK, at least, there will be a slightly different answer, focusing on slightly different issues depending on where somebody's coming from. So I think and they're not mutually exclusive. In the end, part of having security in the north is about having economic sustainability. It's about having communities that are bought into it and prosper. It's about having the military capabilities, the defense capabilities that we need. And so if you look at it from the UK, I think more of it is about security because it's not our communities there, right? So we're looking at it in terms of how do we lean into the security side. But clearly, climate change and the research into climate change and understanding the impacts of climate change is, as you say, the first thing that people think about when they think about the Arctic. That's why it's changing in many ways. Part of it is Russia and the new aggression from Russia. But a bigger part, I would suggest, is actually climate change opening up the Arctic in a way that it hasn't been open in the past. So the sort of the fundamentals are around climate change. The response, yes, is partly about climate change, but it's also about all those economic questions, all that defence question. And if you ask most people in the UK, I think they would see the Arctic as part of a wider set of issues. The defence security conversation in the UK at the moment is dominated about Russia and the Euro-Atlantic. That's what you heard through Strategic Defence Review. Europe first, not Europe only, but NATO area first. So that's what dominates it. But the Arctic is part of that. And it's part of how you deal with that more aggressive Russia, that set of threats. And climate change makes that much more acute than it would have been in the past.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Ambassadors, do either of you have something to add in terms of what you see the conversation being at home for either of you? I know the EU is broad to use the term home, but in terms of what those conversations are like, or in Germany as well, considering, like I said, Germany itself isn't an Arctic state. In the EU, most members are themselves not Arctic states. What the conversation is like at home and what the framing is like for you as diplomatic officials.
Yes, thank you. Maybe just two remarks. The first one is that till the very beginning, our strategy, October 2021, was clearly a comprehensive one. So climate change, of course, was one of the main topics, but not just climate change. As I mentioned, comprehensive meaning also taking into account the situation on the ground, the situation of indigenous people. I mentioned education as well. But security now, this is so obvious after the full invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Things are a bit different, I have to say. So the angle, the security angle and defense is even more present today. So obviously, as you mentioned, the Arctic states are responsible and primarily responsible for tackling issues within their territories. But now we notice that it's not just a question of security of the Arctic or Arctic state. This is a question of security for the EU and for the world. I said it, the entire world. So that's maybe the reason why now the angle security and defense is much more present. And to come back to the summit in June, so peace and security now figure as the main topic. Not bad, but climate change is still there. But now we see that there is maybe a shift or an additional priority, even more than it was already the case in 21.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lüttenberg. I'm curious for you what your response is.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Germany and Germans in general always had a fascination for the Arctic and the Antarctic region. There's so many youth books about it, but when we think about the Arctic, we usually think in terms of research and climate change. Why is that? Because we're also affected by climate change. You see the rise of the sea levels, you see European partners like the Netherlands, but also the German coast, which is affected by whatever is going on in the north. And we don't even have to travel as far as the Pacific Ocean to see how climate change is affecting our countries. And we have to understand it if we want to stop it. And this is why we're focusing so much on it. But we are also very eager to share the research and research opportunities with other partners. I mentioned Polarstern, our research ship, but there's a second Polarstern about to be built as we speak. They're already working on it. And it will cost us more than 1.5 billion Canadian dollars, which is quite a substantial sum of money, because we think it's worth it. And we had opened it up for other partners to do research jointly with us, to travel the north and the Antarctic as well, to be able to understand. But, and this is important, and I think we all referred to it already, and the perception of the Arctic has changed. It's not only about climate change, it's also become an area where security matters even more, especially for those countries like Canada who are a part of the Arctic. And as Rob Tinline has rightly said, when we were traveling in places like Resolute Bay or Arctic Bay in the very north of your beautiful country, we were exposed to the vulnerability, but also of the people, not only of the territory. It's not only about sovereignty, but it's also about people who live there and the infrastructure needs which are there. But we also saw the tremendous footprint of all our researchers from all our countries, from the EU, who are already working so closely to see what can be done, what needs to be done. On the military end, I would just like to highlight, and other countries are doing the same, the way to increase our interoperability in the maritime sphere. We have, for example, the maritime partnership with Canada, Norway, Denmark, and Germany. And we are also, of course, interested in enlarging this cooperation in different areas above the sea and under the sea. This would be something for the future, but I think I feel the focus is shifting here. The fact that also the German vessel is now traveling up north, this is underlining not our claim on anything, but our fear that we are approaching an era where the Arctic region will become more and more an area of military influence by countries that are also not necessarily European countries.
Thank all of you. I have a few just thoughts in trying to bring together some of the threads that were discussed and see if we can turn it into a bit of a question. There's discussion at the beginning about the importance of actually educating folks within NATO. And so there is that internal need for education about the Arctic. This goes well beyond NATO. Oftentimes, and this kind of gets back a bit to the kind of climate change versus defense, and are they one or the other discussions is, we often talk about things impacting Northerners and less so much so on what Northerners are saying and how they are articulating things themselves. In Canada now have, the North itself is very much becoming part of this conversation, is able to link the two of them together in terms of, I think it really comes to the nucleus around infrastructure and the need to build infrastructure, and how multi-purpose infrastructure would solve a lot of the issues in terms of economic security, also all the social aspects from food security to health issues, the telecommunications gap and the impacts that has, to the more conventional defense issues. And then we've also kind of talked about these different programming in terms of research. There's the UK Canada actually ITK collaboration. There's a Horizon 2020. Canada's going to be starting a new Borealis program focused on like AI and technology and innovation. And it's just making me think whether there's a need to maybe educate more broadly, let's just say like, Europe, North America, on the more nuances about the Arctic itself. So it's not just framed as a big security and defense issue or just a climate change issue. And I'm wondering if there is an opportunity here, maybe though, and thinking back now to the discussion about Ukraine, right? And so what are we learning from Ukraine about how war is changing? And are we at a point where there's a real big opportunity to make sure that Arctic, the region, is safe, but also to really do some new innovations. And I'm thinking, it's way beyond cold weather technology, but innovations that are going to scale, beyond the Arctic. And if there's, in what way could there be then a mechanism to help galvanize or launch such an opportunity, maybe more strategic thinking in terms of programming, I guess, specific programs and that type of thing. And that's not really a question, of just kind of bringing a lot more of my thoughts together on some of the takeaways from this discussion, but perhaps it could lend into, just before we wrap up, maybe if you can, bring it back to Canada a bit, if there's one area of opportunity that you could say, this is the biggest opportunity that we have in our relationship with Canada on the Arctic around these broader sets of defense and security issues. Is there one that, your own country or EU says, this is where we have a big opportunity to do things together and strengthen that area? Did any of you take it off? Robert, Professor Tinline, maybe because you don't have your.
Okay. So look, as I say, I think this isn't all new, and we just need to. We're building on quite a lot of joint work that already exists, and so I'm just careful that we don't present this as a sort of nobody's ever thought about the Arctic before, and now we're all thinking about the Arctic. I think we've done a lot of work together in the Arctic, obviously over the years, but this is a moment of step change, absolutely. In terms of a sort of single place of cooperation, I think I'd bring it back to the Prime Minister's statement, the joint statement that they made in June. And a lot of this is about that sort of innovation question of this is a vast area that is opening up in a way that it hasn't been open previously. So how do we have the way that works across the Arctic with the peoples who work there, led by the governments who in whose territory the Arctic lies, to enhance our security? Clearly, it's going to need some new ideas and some new solutions to monitor, to know what's going on, and to deal with whatever we need to deal with. And so I think it's that sort of innovation question comes back to our strategic defence view as well. What is it that the innovations that are going to allow us to enhance the security of the Arctic in a way that works for the people there, but also works for the broader security of all our countries?
If I may, I fully align myself with what Tinline has just said. I think it's really important to strike the right balance between military research and continue doing both. But for sure, I mean, the perception has changed and the security threat has changed. There's no doubt about that. Education, although Germans love to educate others, but in this case, it's the Arctic region who has to tell us first of all, what they need, what they want, and how we can cooperate. But whenever you try to educate people, you need money for this. You need to have, also if you spend money, you have to explain why you're doing it. So this is maybe something which is important also for our politicians in Germany to raise the awareness. Why are we spending money, for example, on certain ships or submarines which are able to go under the ice? Why is it important to have a look into into space from northern bases like in Inuit, for example? Why do we spend so much money on permafrost and on these research ships? And this is something that not everybody might understand immediately, because there's so many other competing issues that need our attention. But I think it's very well spent money and very important also to be in close connection with the Arctic nations. And this is certainly one of the takeaways that I took from the trip to the Northern Territories. That there's so much to learn from the indigenous population, but also from our Canadian partners. And when you look at the research footprint, when you look at the infrastructure which has been built over the last couple of years, both in military and civilian terms, this is really impressive. So therefore, I have a good feeling about our future cooperation, especially now with the 3.5 plus 1.5% NATO spending. So we do have the money available. We just have to spend it wisely.
Yes. If I may just maybe to conclude with a few words, you mentioned to educate or to, I would prefer to talk about raising awareness, that's maybe better. But even if we are already well informed, and as I mentioned, the EU is quite active with our research program in the Arctic. But I see as a good sign the recent designation of an Arctic ambassador by the Canadian. I think last Friday, the Prime Minister announced designation of an ambassador from the region, from the north. So that's a good sign. And we have also, as you know, the External Action Service in the EU has a special envoy for the Arctic. So more dialogue, more cooperation would be very much appreciated, even if, as I mentioned, we are, I think, doing a lot and we are investing a lot in the Arctic as EU, meaning EU 27 member states. And maybe raising awareness would be good via dialogue between our two ambassadors, notably, but not just that, also at political level, of course.
Excellent, absolutely. And I appreciate the piece about us having now an ambassador, an Arctic ambassador, and I think that is very important. On the innovation front, you know, we often talk about innovating out of the Arctic, and that's a bit of what goes back to the raising awareness, and it's often a hard sell, I guess. It's not top of mind, and when we think about investments coming from the governments, how they're going to have to invest, but there is also this aspect to it of around private capital. And so if it's by raising awareness, then it becomes something that, you know, private capital starts thinking in their own minds that the Arctic is a place where you can innovate out of, and you could start to scale up and scale out these new technologies. And especially then that is an opportunity for those who live in the North, because when we think about these kind of innovation opportunities, they're multi-purpose, they're dual use, and they will definitely address then the needs of the Northerners at the same time, so while protecting everything. I think we'll wrap it up here. I want to thank, unless anyone has last minute thoughts or comments, I'm all open, all ears. But I really want to thank you all, the three of you, for, I know you're all busy schedules and it's summer, for just taking the time to talk with us and to discuss with us. I hope we'll see you in February for our annual conference in Toronto, where we can kind of pick up on these on this discussion and see where we're at by February. And I just want to thank you. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too.
This music is produced by Tulucat. We thank them for allowing us to share the music with our listeners, and we hope that you'll check them out wherever you listen to your music.
As a reminder, the views expressed on this podcast are the views of the participants alone and do not represent the views or opinions of Arctic 360, the Monk School of Global Affairs, or any other government or agency. Thank you for listening to Breaking the Ice. Follow Arctic 360 on social media to stay up to date on the latest podcast episodes and the Arctic 360 content. You can find us on all streaming and several social media platforms, or you can visit our website at arctic360.org. Thank you for listening. This is Breaking the Ice.